Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sarah Eiley, and as Manager of Arts and Culture at the City of Calgary, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. We're incredibly proud of the work that the Public Art Program staff are able to do with the staff in all of the departments of the city, but we're particularly keen, of course, this week on the work that we do with the Department of Utilities and Environmental Protection. And we've gained quite a wonderful reputation over the years for some really extraordinary work that has been led by some extraordinary artists. And we're delighted to be welcoming some more extraordinary artists into Calgary to learn about the watershed and the dynamic environment in which we live this week. And we're absolutely thrilled the rest of you could be here tonight to hear from them. So you're going to have, I think, quite a treat tonight. I gather they've had a very exciting week. And we're going to have a lot of food for thought. Dr. David Soshin is here from the University of Regina, who is a real specialist in the area of the environment. And we have wonderful artists who have joined us from across the water, by which I mean the Atlantic Ocean in this case. From the UK, we have 2 artists from the UK and 2 artists from just south of the border in the US. But it is my great pleasure right now to introduce an artist who's been really an amazing catalyst for exciting work here in Calgary as one of 2 lead artists with Watershed Plus, Tristan Surtees.
Welcome everybody, thank you very, very much for coming. So I'm Tristan Surtees, one half of the lead artist team for Watershed Plus. This is Charles Blond, the other half, and I'll try and encourage him to do some speaking if possible. So this is Watershed Plus Dynamic Environment Lab event. So this is the end of the kind of programming week, and it's really a kind of moment to share with you the intent of the lab and to share with you some of the artists who have been involved this week, and also to look through David's eyes at the kind of complex issues surrounding the dynamic environment, and share some of that experience that we've had this week and invite you to consider those things also. Watershed Plus is part, as Sarah said, of the City of Calgary's Utilities and Environment Protection Department's Public Art Programme. And Watershed Plus is just one part of that overall programme. Its intention is really to embed artists in the activities of what the utility does on a day-to-day basis. So artists are brought in on the beginning of design projects, they're working on temporary works, permanent works, and also events. Its ultimate objective really is to build and work with the emotional connection between people and their watershed. So to deal with all of those complexities. So what is a lab? We asked ourselves that question too, and we started to think about it. It was really born from the experience of our first artists in residence, where we understood from them they spent a long time developing and learning from that place, and we really felt that to develop a work, to make work that's contextual, that's responsive to place, responsive to important issues that are relevant to the organisation, artists need to have a deep understanding. And so the idea of a lab is really to invite them to explore those issues with subject matter experts, and to have a really rich, meaningful experience themselves, to explore new ways of working in relation to a utility. And this week, they've been able to listen, learn, touch, and in some cases smell all of the work that the organisation does. So to really build up their own connection with the organisation. The call itself went out last year. We had somewhere between 80 and 90 submissions. Really exciting artists applying to really embrace the idea of going for 1 week to understand the context, and then to make a proposal thereafter to make new work in response to that issue. So ultimately the intention is that new public artworks will come out of this experience. So we took them upstream to the headwaters, the Bow Lake, Bow Glacier. Bow Glacier is and I'm sure there's many water engineers in the room will correct me, but there's only 2 or 3% of the glacier contribute to the water that we drink, but it's where it starts.
I think it's 8 actually. It's actually 8.
Thanks for speaking to correct me, Charles. Appreciate it. So this is the glacier above and the lake below we snowshed. This is where our first experience of the, as artists ourselves, started in relation to the watershed. We went downstream to Blackfoot Crossing to understand some of the First Nations history, but also to understand the very different dynamic of a prairie environment, and also some of the impacts that happened in 2013 further downstream after the city. We spent a lot of time with subject matter experts, both, you'll see in one of these pictures, Rennie Letourneau and Chris Houston, people that work with field services, people that operate and design and work with consultants to build flood mitigation projects, flood management projects, some really physical things that happen in our city which allow us to live in a dynamic environment. We had an incredible time inside the laboratories, so both the drinking water and the sanitary system laboratories, we got to see water bears through microscopes, we got to understand what takes place there, and also further upstream at some of the facilities at the Glenmore Reservoir and what goes on behind the doors. And also, I think it's important when you're an artist coming to a place that you understand the cultural context in which you're working. And many of the arts organisations here very kindly open their doors and welcome the artists just to create an introduction really to what happens here in Calgary. So this is what happened. A lot of this is what took place. We were on coaches, we were travelling, we drove the artists really hard, lots of creative conversations between engineers, between curators, between the artists themselves, so questioning and interrogating different issues in relation to the watershed. This is a photograph. We started artists with an 8 a.m. meeting every morning and presentations just to completely overload them. And then we set off on the coach, and it was an incredibly intensive and kind of creative experience for the week.
So if they look tired, that's our fault.
So as I said, the outcome, the intention of the outcome is that the new works will be created. We are incredibly excited this evening because you'll get to have a conversation with the artists that are presenting. You'll also be able to talk to David and sort of question some of the issues that he'll bring to the fore. So we've asked each of the artists to present a 10-minute introduction to their work and talk about what they've done in the past and how they kind of approach projects of very different kinds. But first, it's my really great pleasure, and when we asked David if he would really tackle an overall view of his understanding of the dynamic environment, and David essentially very kindly agreed. So to introduce David properly, I'm terrible at reading text, so I'm going to try and read this text by way of introduction, David. David Simpson is a research professor at the Prairie Adaptation Research Collaborative at the University of Regina. His main research interest is the climate and hydrology of the past millennium in Canada's western interior, and how knowledge of the past can inform scenarios of future climate and water supply. David is currently co-directing a 5-year interdisciplinary study of the vulnerability of rural agricultural communities in climate extremes in Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, and in the Canadian prairies. His other current research includes studies of fluctuations in water levels over the past 1,000 years and the relationship between regional climate variability and global climate change. Please join me in welcoming David Simpson.
Thanks, Tristan. I want to thank you and Kira for inviting me to do this. Excuse me. It's not my normal gig, although it's probably a lot more fun than my normal gig. Can everybody see the screen okay? Yeah. It's fairly important. I want you to look at the screen and not me. In fact, I think I'm gonna drift into the background here. There we go. Just to ensure that everybody can see these images. Starting with this image of the Earth. It was captured by a NASA satellite of our blue planet. And the reason our planet is blue is because it's mostly water. 3/4 of the Earth is covered in water. And you can see North America in the middle, and to the west, the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is huge. It's 1/3 of the Earth's surface. It's 16 times larger than Canada. and it's just upwind of Calgary. So this is where we get nearly all of our water. And the neat thing about this iconic image is it's showing just that. It's showing the delivery of water from the Pacific Ocean to Calgary. Here's Calgary, more or less. And it's in the path of 3 storms. Those big swirling clouds, scientists call those cyclones. They're large masses of water, and they're wet. And we know they're wet because of all the clouds. So what this image is showing us is the weather at Calgary on this particular day and for the next few days, which is the delivery of water from the Pacific Ocean through a series of storms that are tracking across Western Canada. And we can see the weather because the clouds are the physical expression of the weather. This image, however, is from Google Earth. And Google gets rid of the clouds because they want to show people the Earth's surface. And so Google compiles cloud-free images. They don't want to obscure your view of the Earth, and therefore they've gotten rid of the clouds. What you can see here is you can't see the weather, but what you can see is the climate. You can see a large area of green, which is forested, which means that it's warm enough and wet enough to support trees over a large part of Canada. But in the southern part of the Canada, where we live, great, this area here, the Northern Plains, is dry. We know the weather's dry because there are no trees. And similarly, it must be cold up here and it must be cold up here because there's snow. So we can actually infer from the land cover, from the surface cover of the Earth, we can infer what the dominant kind of weather is, whether it's warm or cold or hot or dry. And that's because a certain type of weather reoccurs again and again and again. Here, and here, and here. It's a different type of weather, but it's typical of that part of the Earth. Now, I'm making that distinction between weather and climate right off the top because it's extremely important. What plagues the discussion of climate change is people keep confusing weather and climate. How often have you heard somebody say, it's cold today, therefore there's no global warming? Sorry, you're confusing the weather and the climate. Think of it this way. There's Calgary again. Think of weather as your mood and climate as your personality. Okay, if you know somebody really well, like a friend or somebody in your family, you expect them to behave a certain way because you know their personality. But on any given day, they could be feeling happy or sad or up or down or elate or ecstatic or bummed out on any given day. But given their personality, they tend to have a certain mood more often. And similarly, we define the climate as what you expect, the weather you expect to see at a certain place on a certain day. This is the weather that we expect to see at Calgary. This is the normal climate for 30 years, back to 1981. And those curves, the top curve is the high temperature, the bottom curve is the low temperature, and the middle curve is the normal. And those green bars, that's how much precipitation you expect at Calgary on any particular month of the year. So this month we expect it to be about -13 at night and about -2 during the day. And that's based on 30 years of weather. That is climate. Weather is what you actually get. And in Calgary, it can be almost anything. This is last year. A year ago, January 25th, it was +17 in Calgary. And that picture is from the Calgary Herald. People out walking and almost in t-shirts. Conversely, last August on the 22nd, the temperature dropped to 4 degrees and it snowed in Calgary in the middle of summer. There was some bad weather in Calgary in June 2013. It rained very hard. That was the weather that day. And here is the weather radar. This weather map, green represents a lot of rain, and blue represents rain, but not as much. And you can see there was an intense rainstorm over Calgary, and as a result, there was catastrophic flooding. And yet the headlines read, we have to do something about climate change because Calgary had a flood. Once again, we're confusing weather and climate. Although you can appreciate the fact that if people are exposed to weather they have never seen before, most people in Calgary hadn't experienced a flood like that, they say, what's going on? It's got to be climate change. Well, it's okay for Maclean's magazine to say that, but scientists wouldn't say that. In fact, here's a group of 3,000 scientists, and what they said is, it's very difficult to attribute an individual weather event to external forcing. And what they mean by external forcing is a change in the climate. The climate is definitely changing. The external forcing they're talking about is this. We've had a dramatic change in the chemistry of the atmosphere. This is for the whole world. This is the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere back 400,000 years. And you can see that for about 400,000 years, the carbon dioxide had a concentration of about 300 parts per million maximum. It never exceeded that. In the 20th century, it skyrocketed, especially since 1950. So presently, the concentration of carbon dioxide has exceeded 400 parts per million. And of course you know that we've done that. We've combusted fossil fuels, and we've completely changed the chemistry of the atmosphere. That is the external forcing they're talking about. We have forced a change in the atmosphere. And what's happened? Well, this is the 7 warmest years since 1880. And that, notice scientists use a lot of graphs. But graphs are really how we express ourselves. We deal in numbers. And the way we visualize things is by putting them on graphs. And if you study weather and climate, you usually put them on a graph that has years across the bottom or months across the bottom. We call these time series. And so here is the monthly temperatures for 7 years that have been warmer than any other year back to 1880. Notice these years are 1998 and 6 years since 2005. And the year that we just had, 2015, is off the scale. It blows everything out of the water. You can see that it's between 0.8 and 0.9 degrees warmer than anything else since the 1880s. So this is a pretty good indication that something is going on in terms of the world's climate. Here's another time series. This is the average temperature of the Earth back to the year 1880. And if it's blue, that year was below average. If it's red, that year was warmer than average. And you can see that since the early 1980s, every single year has been above average. Not only that, but this past December was the 370th consecutive month that was warmer than average. So it's pretty clear that something's going on, and we call it global warming. We call it global warming because it is a change in temperature, and you can see it if you look at the whole world. And you have to look at the whole world, because the climate doesn't start and stop, it covers the entire world. So we never say, oh, it's Calgary warming, or it's Canada warming. We always say it's global warming. If you look at the whole world, it's pretty clear something's going on. But, however, it's not quite that simple, because this is not a straight line. It sort of comes and goes. And when it goes away, the skeptics come out of the woodwork. And when it goes way up, the extremists come out of the woodwork. You have to expect this is nature. It doesn't work in a linear fashion. But keep that in mind, that even though every year has been warm, some years are warmer than others. That's the whole world. What about Calgary? Well, here's Calgary, another graph, another time series. Calgary back to 1886. We have really good weather data for Calgary back to 1886. And this is the low temperature in winter. Okay, so for every year, we take the night, usually it's nighttime, not always, but usually the coldest weather is at night. We take the average for every winter, and it's been going up. This is global warming in our part of the world. And the best way to describe it is it's not getting warmer, it's getting less cold. Much, much less cold. Look at this year, 1969. I was here, high school student in Alberta. It was damn cold. There was about 30 days when it was below minus 30. How often is it below minus 30? It hasn't been yet this winter, at least in Regina, which is colder than Calgary. Okay, so it's been getting much, much less cold, although once again, it goes back and forth, it jumps around. It's like walking your dog, right? You want to go in a straight line, your dog is following its nose. What's the implications of that? Well, if it's getting warmer in winter, we are losing the advantage of a cold winter. There's huge advantages to minus 35. It kills a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that can't survive minus 35, like the pine beetle. And there's lots of other pests and pathogens and disease vectors and nasty things and invasive species that are showing up on our farms, in our forest, because the winter isn't nearly as hostile as it used to be. But by far the biggest advantage of a cold winter is this stuff. That's where we get our water. Virtually all of our water is melting snow. And as our winter warms, we'll tend to get rain and not snow. The nice thing about snow is it stays around. It just builds up, and then it melts in the spring, and we capture it in the reservoirs and we store it. Now, if we are losing snow, therefore we are also losing the glaciers. Because after all, a glacier is nothing more than snow that didn't disappear. Now, we just heard correctly that the Bow Glacier is getting so small, it only produces about 8% of our water. Most of our water doesn't come from ice, it comes from snow. But the disappearance of the glacier, you can see here, 1902, Bow Glacier is down by the forest. 100 years later, it's way up here. Pictures taken by the Vaux family. Henry Vaux took this picture. I'm going to see Henry next week in Panama. He said, Dave, would you come to Panama and give a talk? When, Henry? January. Yes, I'll be there. I'll be in Panama. Well, if the water comes from the snow and the snow is disappearing, this is another time series. This is the water in the Bow River at Calgary, right back to 1911 every year. And you can see the water is slowly going down because the glacier is disappearing and the snow is being replaced by rain. But again, and I hope you notice I'm trying to make this message, this line is just a statistical abstraction. I just put that there. The actual water does this. It goes back and forth and back and forth. If I didn't put that line there, you may not even be able to detect that the water is going down. Because from year to year, you can have almost anything. And also from decade to decade. There are decades like the 1930s and 40s when there wasn't much water, and decades like the 1960s and 70s when there was more. So, to understand our dynamic environment, you have to understand two things. How we are forcing the climate system. We are changing the chemistry of the atmosphere. Therefore, we are forcing changes. But there's a lot of change that's perfectly natural, or it used to be. So, if you want to look into the future and try to figure out what the climate is doing, Winston Churchill said, look in the past. And I took his advice about 25 years ago and started collecting wood. Because the amount of wood that a tree adds every year depends on the weather that year. So, In our lab at the University of Regina, we have more than 8,000 pieces of old wood that I've collected over the last 25 years. Mostly from here. Because this is where the water comes from, not just for Calgary, but for everybody downstream, right into Manitoba. And that's where we collect the old wood. This is just south of Calgary. And there we are collecting wood. There's one of my Chilean students. I go down there, they come up here. I was just been down in Chile collecting wood. And these are really, really, it's like 1,000-year-old trees just south of Calgary. And we've collected so much wood, including right from the city. This is in the city of Calgary. This is the Stony Trail Bridge. These trees here, these fir trees, are 450 years old. And the city gave us permission to collect some of that wood. It tells us how much water is in the river because the trees and the river are both responding to the same cycle. They're using the same water. They're losing the same water. So they are mathematically linked. If we measure the river, if we measure tree growth, we come up with a mathematical model. And we've been able to give the city of Calgary how much water is in the river back to the year 1111. And I was there this afternoon at the Water Center, giving them this information. If it was a wet year, it's blue. And if it's a dry year, it's red. The thing to note is it's back and forth all over the place. But also, these red things are really, really dry years, like the 1930s, 1980s. And we've suffered through the 1930s if you're really old, or the 1980s if you're not that old. But it could have been a lot worse. Here is entire centuries in which the Bow River was very low. So we kind of picked a good time to displace the First Nations and occupy southern Alberta, because it could have been a lot worse. And it still could be a lot worse if we get something like this, which is about half a century of low river levels. So it's not a great message we give the city, but they appreciate the fact that they now know this, that we've enjoyed a relatively abundant water in southern Alberta, just because of the nature of the climate over the past 100 years, but also because the glaciers have been melting and giving us bonus water. All that water that's been stored up in the Rocky Mountains in the ice has been released, and we've been using it. I love collecting the wood. I just have a few slides left, because it tells a really good story. If you look closely, you can see those weather cycles. I made the same mistake. We don't know what the weather was like each year, but we know what the climate was. Because there was a summer of weather that produced either a wide ring, so it must have been warm and wet, or there might have been a whole bunch of summers that were dry and produced narrow rings. You can see the variability of the climate in a piece of wood like this, which is 812 years old. And the nice thing about wood, it's a great prop because people believe it. It's real. It's tangible. You can smell it. You can taste it. It tastes great. And who doesn't like the smell of pine trees and fir trees? And you can hold it in your hands. So when I give public talks, I usually bring a piece of wood, except today I was on the airplane and I had carry-on. The alternative is to use a model. Models just don't evoke an emotional response from people for some reason. Models are great because they teach us a lot about how the world works. Scientists love numerical models, computer models. But most people don't relate that well to them. Whereas you give them a piece of wood, you sand it, you show them the rings, you make it into a cutting board or a clock or a coffee table, and it has some kind of emotional connection that people have with the climate through the wood. Now, we can see these. Anybody anybody can see them. In fact, when we're collecting the wood, we have to get permission either from the Alberta government or the Canadian government, or typically we get permission from ranchers because they own a lot of this land. And they love to talk about the weather and the climate. So first of all, you chat about weather and climate for a few hours and then get back to work. So here's a fellow south of Calgary in the Porcupine Hills, and I said, Reno, can we go up in the bush? Oh yeah, Dave, he said, the cows don't eat trees, they eat grass, so get rid of the trees. But he said, you're not going to find any old trees, he said, because I used to have a sawmill here and I cut down the old trees. And he said, you know what, when I was sawing down these trees, I noticed something. If you can't see it from the back of the room, it says, looking at the tree rings, I found there's a cycle of about 60 years. But 60 years isn't certain. It could be 70 years, it could be even less. With weather, nothing is written in stone. A scientist couldn't say it any better than that. He found the weather cycles just because he was putting so many pieces of wood through his sawmill. And he has all his fingers, which I find is remarkable. But of course, there's lots of uncertainty. Well, it's fine. Anybody can look at the trees and they can see the weather cycles and the climate cycles, but a scientist gets paid to explain it. And here's the explanation, last slide, for those cycles in the tree rings. Because the water that makes the trees grow comes from the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean is a fluid. It's circulating. It's dynamic. It's huge. It's deep. And the water is constantly moving along a temperature gradient. It moves from hot to cold. It also moves according to salinity. But there are these circulation patterns in the ocean, and they cause water sometimes to come to Western Canada, and other times to go to California, but not both. So either southern Alberta gets the water, and California does not, or vice versa. And the explanation is in the circulation of the ocean, and the explanation lies in the temperatures of the water and the temperature gradient. But here's the wild card. We are heating up the oceans. You know all this heat that we're trapping next to the Earth? Most of it's going into the oceans because most of the world is ocean. And heat holds a lot more water than land. So we are heating up the oceans, which means that we are changing those natural cycles, which means that we are now in the post-natural world. Nothing is natural anymore. And scientists call our present time the Anthropocene, the period of human domination. So this idea of calling something human and something natural really doesn't work anymore. It just confuses the situation. We have to think in terms of we have intervened in every single natural cycle at a global scale. Which some people react to with despondence, but from a scientific perspective, it's fascinating. It's like a huge experiment. And we just hope we can control it. And I'll stop there.
So I realised I lied to the artist. I said we've stopped absorbing information for the day. Thank you very much, David. Huge amounts of food for thought and an introduction really to some of the complexities of the things that we are thinking about when we're addressing an idea of a dynamic environment lab. The first artist this evening to present his past work is Tim Knowles. Knowles works across a range of mediums, utilising drawing, photography, video, sculptural interventions, and participatory events or actions. The work often exists in multiple forms as a happening or event, an exhibition, an online project, a publication, or even as an idea spread by word of mouth. Much of his work involves collaboration with artists, scientists, other professionals, and experts in the fields to realise a project. exploring topics and techniques that are now new to him. Noel's works are process-oriented and rely on the change in environmental elements. Over the past year and a half, Knowles has been artist in residence at the Institute of Biological, Environmental and Rural Studies, a world-leading centre for research and education in Aberystwyth in Wales, where he has focused on investigating the water cycle in plants and the landscape at large. Please welcome Tim Knowles.
Thank you, Tristan. First of all, I just want to say thank you to City of Calgary, Watershed Plus, and Tristan and Charles for bringing us over here. It's been an amazing week. I feel my mind is sort of almost at complete capacity and going to explode. But it's been an amazing opportunity to see fantastic places and meet incredible experts in their field, and also the other artists who are great fun. So, I work across I'm going to move this around, a very wide range of mediums, quite varied quite often, but I hope that when you look at it all as a practice, it's very clear that it all ties together. And so some of the works, for example, this might be a photograph. This is a photographic work. This is a long exposure photograph of me walking away from the camera with huge floodlight torches, and I walked for 2 hours, and this was just a single image that came out. So much of the work is to do with motion and tracing of that motion, and working with a whole range of materials. Here it's found objects, so beer bottles and meadow grass. Let's play. And so a lot of it explores motion at its heart and these dynamic systems that we were talking about. And often making visible things that aren't immediately apparent, and trying to look at the complex relationships between these systems. So it's just a little video. So this is another strand of the work. This was a group of works called tree drawings. And again, tracing hidden or not immediately apparent movement. Here we have a hawthorn tree that's producing a drawing with a pen attached to the tip of its branch. These drawings are very much like signatures. You've got some of the trees that might be very fluid, produce very sort of delicate, quite, expressive drawings, if you like. Others, the hawthorns, are very tight, stiff, scratchy tree. So they have very different qualities like signatures. But for me, it's not just about these drawings, it's about the process and making the viewer understand that process that's gone on. So they're always shown with a photograph or a video of that drawing taking place. And much like any sort of scientific experiment, and that's what I'm interested in doing, relinquishing control, setting up a situation like an experiment where I'm not in direct control of the outcome, but I set the parameters. So choosing and sometimes even making my own pens, but here using a spirit-based pen that has a very light touch that would draw with very light contact on the paper, but also that seeps ink, it bleeds. So it's drawing time spent stationary, not just time moving. Here we've got a weeping willow with 100 pens tied to its branches. And there's the piece in the gallery. Other works, postal work. So it's not always natural systems that I'm investigating. Here it's man-made system, the postal system. And I've done a whole number of works, I'm just showing a few that investigate the postal system. And so with these works, I place a blank piece of paper in a box, seal it up and post it. And it's only at the other end that a drawing's been produced with the movements of the box, and also, again, these pauses where it spends time on a shelf in a sorting office. That's the Mark 1 and 2, there's various others. This idea of the act of delivery becoming an act of production. For this piece, I set off from my studio with blank paper in a car, and this drawing was produced as I drove to the gallery in Italy. So setting off with nothing and arriving with the work when I got there. And this is just, there's a mechanism in the back of the car that moves as if with the forces at work within the car, and the paper slowly pulled through on a rolling system. So there's quite a lot of work that's involved wind, and kind of, I've thought at times, why is it that I'm so attracted to this? And I think it's particularly that it's such a complex, huge system. We can't see the wind, we can see its effects, but it's operating all over. As I'm moving my hands here and all around the world, it's a very complex dynamic system. And there's something about that I like, and that as a human I kind of want to try and map it, try and see what it's doing, but I know I can't really map it properly, and it's this huge complex system. And so one of these works with wind, I thought it'd be a really nice and sort of poetic or romantic idea to make a walk where the wind took me. And this was the first attempt. So I made a little wind vane, and I tried to follow this in the landscape. And this was actually quite a failure, because the wind vane was in fact in the sort of shadow or the lee of my body, and so constantly ended up going round. So my path was this sort of circular looping path. So I had to find somewhere else, some other way that I didn't interfere with this. And the logical thing was to place it on my head, with a stainless steel pivot here, and this very light structure that could move freely. And there's no way I can control it. I can move my head from side to side, and it will sit there, the resistance compared to the air resistance on the sail, if you like. And I would just walk with keeping this directly in front of me. So I made initially walks in London, setting off from various locations, and in the middle of the night so I could walk very freely through the city. And it was an amazing way of exploring a city that I thought I knew well, but I ended up finding all these sort of hidden gems, little places that I didn't know of at all, that were so close to my commute or places I went regularly. And very often ending up with the plastic bags down at the end of the leaves sort of circling at the end of an alleyway, a cul-de-sac. So this was part of a piece, 7 Walks from 7 Dials, where I set off walking from this monument. There are 7 streets that radiate out from it, and I mapped my path. And I was really interested in the way that this meandering line collides with the rigid structure of the city. City buildings, obstacles, city blocks. And all of these lines kind of spreading out, but all spaghetti sort of go back to the beginning. So I was asked to do a large project in Sydney, and we had 50 people all walking, setting out at the same point from this public square and dispersing through the city in a Brownian motion-like manner. And each had a smartphone app, so they were tracked as they travelled. And I think this was, this idea of being able to control the outcome, and working with people. These people weren't at all performers. They were just ordinary members of the public who participated. And they were given an introduction and told what they were to do, but they came from very different backgrounds. And there was one point when I sort of, this idea of controlling people and things, and I saw a woman chatting to people at a cafe table, and her I was pointing in the opposite direction. She's there chatting away, and I was like, what's she doing? She can't do that. But sort of I let go, and I like to think that she actually, in that discussion, was explaining what was going on and sort of finished saying, well, I ought to be following this arrow. And that's, where projects can live on as well, through the idea. I'm talking much slower than I did in my previous 10 minutes. I'm used to doing very short 10-minute talks. So this was another project I was invited to lead an artist walk. Just on that last one as well, the idea of people not in control of their life and their destiny, moving out through the city, I quite enjoyed. So for this piece, I was invited to lead an artist walk, and I don't really lead people on walks. It wasn't really my thing. So I went and did a site visit and came to this incredible bowl of a kind of the watershed of the landscape, in which the venue, the host sort of area was. And I was really struck by that, and very quickly had this idea to set out these flags at regular intervals just down on a contour line just down from the watershed. And we had people set off from the flags with a GPS logger, imagining there were water running off the landscape. So looking at the land at their feet, just walking this way and then that, and falling into the sort of initial sort of hollows or slight depressions in the landscape, and then into valleys, walking along rivers. And they all eventually met at the confluence of two rivers. And this was the plot of their route, which is a drawing of the landscape, but it's also a drawing of an action that went on. And you've got various different people. There was one woman here who did this funny little bit. She didn't like the look of that area, didn't want to go through it muddy or whatever, or difficult. And then other people who cut off the corners on the meanders of the river because they were just getting a bit tired by then. So I'll quickly talk about this piece, which is a body of work that I'm just doing currently, and experimenting with the flow of fluid down a form. So all these different little initial test pieces that I've been doing, and interested in the dynamics of that flow and how that structure and form changes the speed and velocity. Starts to go doing. So I better hurry up. And so how that changes the speed and dynamics of that fluid as it flows over the form, and how it at times sort of almost pools in certain areas and then falls again, or can be split as well and fall, as in this case. And so also doing them on a larger scale, that very, as you can see on the side, that very dynamic initial speed of the release of that amount of fluid, and the dynamic sort of shifting out, flowing around these corners, and then that sort of, by the end, it was this very thin, slow flow that came down to the bottom. So there's a few more. These were very large pieces. I'm going to leave it there and just leave you with these. Okay, I'll skim through, but I won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Our next artist, for many I'm sure, doesn't need an introduction. Peter von I'm going to give you one anyway. Peter von Tiesenhausen. Peter's multidisciplinary practice includes painting, sculpture, drawing, printmaking, installation, events, video and performance. Peter's exhibited and lectured widely across Canada as well as in Europe, the United States and Mexico, and has had over 50 solo and many group exhibitions. His work explores the relationships and interactions with the community as an attempt to affect and measure change in a given environment, with the event or installation being only a trace of this, and often utilising the materials found there. He has created several permanent and ephemeral public artworks throughout North America, several here in Calgary, and in Europe, and has works in many public-private collections. There is a strong pursuit of sustainability, often evident in the work, and an exploration of time and substance from a variety of perspectives. Please welcome Peter von Tiesenhausen.
Tristan, and for me as well, it's a huge honor to be here. I feel like we're kind of like a little bit, like these people are pretty awesome. And also, we noticed this week that working with or traveling through all the water services, that it's been the feeling amongst the people that work there is so incredibly positive. You wouldn't imagine you'd find that in any sort of municipal department. Overall, you can say that about every part of everything that we visited. Now, if you guys are all actors, you're paid extra this week or something, I don't know. I'm starting it now. Anyway, it happens as it should. All the stuff that Tristan described, I'm not going to actually present. I'm going to show you my house. We got humble beginnings. I live out on the same piece of land that I grew up on, so about half a mile from where my parents lived. And we built with what we had when we had it. So, and we were really happy and really proud of every little step that we made. At some point, I decided I could make that commitment to be a full-time artist, and that happened to be in 1990. and in May of 1990 I built this white picket fence. And this would be the commitment to the rest of my life as an artist on that piece of land. That's this year, the fence is in the distance. I have a mowed patch there directly from my studio window that goes across the field. Oh yeah, wait a minute. I don't know what happened to the other picture. You know, when you don't save a thing, when you close it, I think you lose half of it. Which is good, because I have way too many. Now this is that same house. It's buried in there. So over the years I've added on and added on and added on. And slowly I've learned how to build. And you know, I take advantage of situations that arise. I had to thin out the spruce forest below the house due to fire issues, potential fire issues. And at the same time I was offered a commission out here outside of Calgary. So I collected all the dead standing 100-year-old spruce trees that had just been choked out. And I stuck them on a hillside out in Millerville. And they just do stuff then, right? Now, this is my son in grade 6, using the sun, to bake banana bread in April. And it's pretty, you know, gummy and good. So I thought, well, why can't we use that for industrial purposes? So we used these 2 mirrors. I don't have a timer on this thing, do you? And we melted some bronze. 5,000 degrees apparently. Now I didn't stick my hand or a thermometer in there. But we did melt the bronze. And I made these funny things for looking at the sun that don't really work. Don't ever try this. I couldn't see, that's actually me going like, huh? So I'm a painter, you'd never know that. And I like to follow places that are kind of cool, ice spots and whatever. I don't know why this slide's in there. This is my son. I always show this slide. This is my son coming out of the dryer. And this is him home for Christmas just recently. So he's grown up in my dog's doghouse. So, anyways, various installations using just materials at hand, like you know, 386 layers of drywall, about 12 tons. And 100 burnt Christmas trees. And if you stood where I'm standing there and looked back, you see that eye looking back at you. Okay. Pine beetles are killing all the trees. So we needed a new community center. We used those materials to build a new community center. It was all paid for the day it was done. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. So that, I think, was an artistic practice, but I'm not sure. My mom still liked me at the end of it, but I was looking a bit haggard, as you can see. They said, "Is that your sister?" But people did come. So a few years ago, like 25, I burnt this wooden figure and laid him in the swamp. And slowly he got covered. You know, when you're in a place for a period of time, you can just watch things happen. And recently a tree sprouted out of his chest. So, I don't want that alarm to go off. Okay, I gotta do that film now real quick. So, just like there was 4 slides, right? So this is the thing I built in the film. And I had somebody come by and they flew a kite with a camera attached to it. And then they were filming my house, and I went, wait a minute, where are you going to put that? And they said, they're going to put it on the internet. And I went, well, wait a minute, that's not good. So you can see there's a tractor parked there somewhere. I can't use pointers too much, it's just too much stress. But you can see the tractor taking off across the field there. That's me on the tractor underneath the kite. And I had to cut a copyright sign into the... So this is a 5-minute film. I'll be 30 seconds over. All filmed on my land. The music is by David Flore Jonsson from Iceland. And I won't tell you the rest. Go out.
Do you use a drone?
Yes.
You did a performance as well as a video. Thank you very much, Peter. Our next artist tonight is Stokely Tolles. For more than a decade, Tolles has explored the systems that keep Seattle alive and the people who run them. Libraries, police, drinking water, solid waste, trail systems, sewers and stormwater, wastewater treatment, city bus drivers. Tolles has evolved a methodology of taking up residency within a system, observing it closely, and interviewing the people who work there. He's performed at conventions, art spaces, bookstores and nightclubs in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles and Seattle. Performance critic Brendan Keeley wrote of Tolles' work, "He examines the mundane aspects of life in Seattle like an anthropologist from another planet, and delivers his findings in rich, understated monologues full of bizarre, colourful trivia and bittersweet observations about how people navigate the world and each other." Please welcome Sophie Tolles.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be part of this week. If given on the choice, I would never take a bus tour in Europe. It's the furthest thing from my mind. But taking a bus tour of utility, it is gold. So thank you. It's been a lovely week. I was getting ready for this talk, and I was trying to get my ideas together. And what I like to do when I'm getting my ideas together is go running. It loosens things up, and I was going to go outside, but it was dark and it was cold, and I was here, so I went to the hotel exercise room, and I was running away on the treadmill, and this was my view. And I've never run for a half hour with a direct view of a toilet before. And I started to realize that this was quite lovely, because here it is. You have water on the left and wastewater. And I got to reflect on the whole system and where do those pipes go? And what's happening out there, and who are the people who run this place? And then I got stuck on one thing. There's that cabinet on the left. Now, that is a refrigerator for hand towels. Because apparently we have this cold weather outside, so we create warm spaces to live within, but then they're too warm for our hand towels, so we create smaller cold spaces for those. A dynamic environment implies extreme flux, change. This implies that we can control the situation. There's something in there. So I'm going to show you a few projects. Officer Dane Jones, Police Officer Dane Jones, he was in Seattle and he was on his night off. He's with his wife and a couple of friends, and they're coming out of GameWorks. And ahead of him, there's a guy in a trench coat. He doesn't really notice the guy until the man lifts his hand up in the air, reveals a knife, yells, and runs down the street. So Dane, he calls to his friends to call 911 and runs after the guy. And he pins him down in a parking lot. Now, Dane doesn't have his handcuffs on him because, it's his night off. But he does have his handgun. Because in Washington State, it's the law for a police officer to have their gun on them at all times, even when on vacation. So he takes the gun, holds it over the man, waits for the police. Two cruisers pull into the parking lot, and the first thing he does is take the gun, put it beneath his shoe, and raise his hands in the air. Because he knows of other plainclothes officers who've been shot when they were mistaken for being the bad guy. Now, people who work in the world of the sewer system in Seattle, they describe what's in the pipes in different ways. Sewer workers, they call it debris, solids, ragging, floatables. If things get backed up, they call it product in the street. At the sewage treatment plant, they talk about upstream food sources, fugitive odors, effluent, activated sludge, stabilized microbial mass, mixed liquor, or simply the flow. Now, where I live in Seattle, the sewage and the stormwater flow through the same pipes, and then on a good day, it goes off to the treatment plant to be processed. But on a more complicated day, heavy rains fall, and there's so much volume in the system that it backs up because it has no place to go. Well, that's why throughout the city, they have buried what I would call these monster empty bathtubs. And the idea is that when the heavy rains fall, it goes into the tub and then slowly drains back into the system to be processed. And of course, if there's too much rain, well, not of course, but if there's too much rain, there's an emergency drain like you might have in a tub where you live that flows into the nearest body of water. And if too much overflow happens, you have a bad situation. Now, John and Ricardo are responsible for cleaning and maintaining these monster bathtubs. Now, maybe you're taking a shower in a tub before and you notice that the water is starting to gather around your ankles and you realize it's clogged. So you reach down there and you grab the hairy brown gook out of the drain, and then you have to find some place to put it. That's sort of what their job is like. Except the tub is much bigger, and the drain, instead of being this big, is this big. And instead of pulling out hair, they're finding basketballs and volleyballs and tree roots and sand and grit, rags that restaurants flush down the toilet, and baby wipes that we send down there. And of course, the toilet is the ceremonial burial place for our pets. So there are dead goldfish and gerbils. And when they're pulling these things out of the drain, they're not reaching down through soapy water. No, they're standing up to here in sewage. So I said to John and Ricardo, how do you manage being surrounded by all that humanness? And John quoted Dale Carnegie, saying, "You certainly have to expand your comfort zone." Ricardo said, "You have to remind yourself." What do you have to remind yourself? Other people's sewage is our money. John, tell yourself lies. This is a candy factory. I'm surrounded by candy, and I'm just shoveling it. Ricardo, you are working in someone else's raw sewage. It'd be different if it was your own. But when it's someone else's, there is no understanding. John, so what you do to make it okay, standing in all that waste, is you imagine that maybe a little bit of me is out there. I did a project in the Seattle Public Library where I worked with library staff and librarians to gather unusual books from within the system. And I'm just going to show you one of those books. And so I created this room and put up a sign, special collections. People could come then look at the books. And I performed for the public every day. And when talking to library administration, they did not want me to discuss weeding the collection, because weeding is when they remove things, books that are not being read, to make space for other books. Well, people, the public, librarians, don't like the idea of removing books because they think they could get thrown away, and that makes us very upset. So no discussion of that topic. Well, how do you talk about that without really talking about it? I talked to the IT department and asked them to run a list of the least checked out books in the building. and then went around and pulled books off the shelves and put them here. You can see them all on these shelves here in the background on the shelves. And none of these books have left the library in more than 10 years, which means very soon they will be eliminated from the collection. So I invited the public to check one out. Not read it, because we don't read books anymore, but open it up to the sky. Put it next to your bed at night. Show it the moon. And then before people checked out the books, I took a picture of them and their book about to go on its adventure. I did a project on the Kane County Trail System. I'm going to show you 3 trails. This is one of them, the Marymore Park, Cedar River Trail, and the Burt Gilman. And the last thing I want to show you is a project about drinking water, where I parked a construction trailer next to a reservoir, and then invited the public to come and look at my exhibition. I put up my flag to signal my concern about the future of drinking water in the world. Inside I performed, told stories about people at the utility, asked people to tell their own stories, and then I had photographic photo prose stories on the wall. I won't read you this one, but that was an image for one. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stokely. The next artist we have this evening is Steve Gersh. Gersh is an interdisciplinary artist who creates expansive narrative structures through a process linking scientific inquiry and popular culture, employing sculpture, time-based media, and public platforms. Social and ecological systems play multiple roles in his work as raw material, contextual backdrop, and subject. Gersh is the co-founder and co-director of The Drift in Pittsburgh, which has created over 20 temporary public artworks and events along the Alhay River, and have curated and collaborated with over 80 artists, performers, and technologists exploring bodies of water as a context, site, and material. Please welcome Steve Gersh.
All right, thank you very much. This week was really amazing. What I'm going to talk about in regards to my practice has a lot to do with these issues of scales, in particular to time, and just having the opportunity to look kind of perplexed at this glacier, and then entering this room later in the week and trying to understand from a scientist what parts per trillion meant was a pretty fantastic experience. And so what I'd like to talk about is some various strategies I've been developing in my work lately that have particular to do with ideas of compression. Compression of expansive narratives, compression of histories, interpolating them with popular culture, interpolating them with sort of ideas of deep time or geologic time, time that exists outside of our human experience. So this is a piece I made earlier this year called Plateau that I took this aerial three-dimensional laser scan of Death Valley and carved it into these foam blocks. And during this work, I started thinking about this image that I constantly return to of Carl Sagan, who's sort of like geeking out next to the Viking 1 lander, which was the first object we'd ever sent on the surface of Mars. And they're here in Death Valley, which you know, to any human is probably what Mars should look like, right? At least in the 70s, that was a good choice. And And so I've been obsessed with NASA's sort of photographic body of work. If you look at these images, these are some of the first images of the moon. What I love about these is just how fractured they are, and looking at these sort of mosaics of a landscape, and how these sort of edges between the images have something to do with sort of the edges of perception. These blocks, these foam blocks, were actually yoga blocks, and I was sort of interested in this idea of the watermark on them, this Gaiam sort of proprietary brand that's on these blocks, and how this idea sort of projects this image that we're used to of seeing a aerial photograph of Earth that has the Google Earth watermark on it, and all these sort of layers of branding and proprietary technologies that are sort of injected into our perception. Here's a levitating incinerated Nike shoe that I made, and it's sort of self-explanatory, I guess. But so then I'd like to talk a little bit at length about this project called The Long Cloud. This project sort of was a way to compress a lot of things at once. One was this very interesting parallel history between the history or emergence of photography with the emergence of our knowledge of radioactive substances. And this is an image that Henri Becquerel created by accident when he placed this packet of uranium salts onto this unexposed piece of photographic plate. And as a result, this strange eminence from this material produced this shadow on the plate. And so he had some sort of theory that there was some sort of connection between this material and this process. It also brought me to sort of understanding the confluence of the economies of nuclear science and its proliferation to a lot of parts of the globe, including New Zealand. Here's this copy of a $100 note with Ernest Rutherford's mug on it, and he sort of invented nuclear science as we know it. And then to the documentation of the sort of anti-nuclear activism that was happening in New Zealand during the 1980s. This is a photo by Gil Hanley, who was responsible for documenting a lot of events during that time, in particular including when the Rainbow Warrior, which was this flagship owned by the Greenpeace organization, in 1987, it was setting sail for the Mururoa Atoll, where it was planning to disrupt this French nuclear weapons test in the middle of the Pacific. However, they were thwarted by 2 explosions on the ship the morning of their journey, which ended up not only sinking the ship, but killing a photographer on board. And it was later discovered that this act of sabotage was a bit of state-sponsored terrorism on behalf of the French government, which did not go over well in New Zealand. And as a result, many sort of the earliest examples of anti-nuclear legislation sort of emerged from that time period. So I began, I booked a trip to New Zealand, and I found this manual because I wanted to find some nuclear material in New Zealand, some sort of like artifact. And I found this manual that directed me to this place known as Uranium Point, where at some period in time, some people had prospected for uranium, but never actually did anything about it. It was never mined. So I visited this site and collected some samples of ore myself, and for a long time I didn't know what to do with this material, but then I found about this photographic technique called a uranotype, where you can actually turn uranium into a photograph. And so this work, every time there's this Geiger counter placed over the image, and every time you hear the Geiger counter click, it marks this period of time that's 4.5 billion years from now, when this material will move along this decay chain and become lead. And coincidentally, 4.5 billion years is as long as this planet has been a planet. So the image I used was actually this image produced by Gil Hanley, the photographer you saw earlier. And it's depicting the ceremonial sinking of the Rainbow Warrior with these two disturbance pools. And so here's this like example of a compression of this historical moment, this whirlpool of history, but also this vortex of deep time, of marking this time period that is so unbelievably large. And so I also want to talk about this collaborative initiative that I've worked with in several capacities in Pittsburgh called The Drift. And it was a group of 7 artists. If you Google Pittsburgh, this is probably what's going to come up. And if you notice, there's a huge footprint of water in the city. And so we started conducting a lot of collaborative works together that engaged the rivers, that brought audiences to the rivers in different ways. This is a project called Azimuth, where we created this kind of prehistoric sky observatory inside this lunar module. We've also done more intervention-based works. This is a group called Drive by Drag that does these drag performances out in public. This was sort of a way to capitalize on this Kenny Chesney concert that was happening in Pittsburgh. And so we've also started this this initiative called H3O, where we've created these events underneath this bridge where we project onto this 6-lane highway bridge. We've invited kayakers to join us as an audience. Typically we curate about 10 artists or so, visual artists working in digital media, to produce works specifically for the event. And we also invite musicians to perform live scores. You see the city skyline in the background there. And these events are really fantastic in the amount of people that are involved. And they're all sort of centered around this this idea of fluidity and how it has sort of seeped into our cultural iconography, also into our technologies, and how this sort of like tactility with our everyday objects has affected how we see these urban environments. So we've invited a number of fantastic artists, both in Pittsburgh but also internationally, to participate in these events. And I think that's my time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. And our final artist for this evening is Becky Shaw. Is that an no, Joe? Shaw makes work that explores a place, encounter, or object using live processes, photography, and text. Beginning with no outcome in mind, Shaw gradually develops what feels like the right response and spends periods of time exploring and responding to place where people interact together, often where production, education, or care happens. The works sit within a tradition of process-based art and involve scrupulous attention to context. Artist Simon Grennan once described Shaw's art practice in this way. Shaw's subject matter is the expanding terrain, or perhaps the shifting sands of the whole of our social experience. The artists who work in this tradition share a desire to interrogate social life by introducing conventions from one sphere into another. At Sheffield Hallam University, Shaw is a tutor for art and design research students, together exploring how artistic methods articulate aspects of our social world. Please welcome Becky Shaw.
Thank you very much. It has been, and I didn't know you were that tall. It has been, not that I thought you were short, it has been an extraordinary week, incredibly intellectually challenging, but I think the thing that I've come away with now more than anything is that it's been a long time since I've been made this welcome, so incredible generosity and warmth with which we've been received and taken care of, so huge thank you. Thank you very much. See, I'm doing start now, like Peter. So I'm really interested in how you can find places where, most places of production where things are made, our social and material world collide. And in those places, our value systems are being worked out and articulated as well. So I spend time going to places, spending time there, very various places, and trying to find a way to catch the flow of social and material life in action. So I've got two projects here. The first one is at this place, Lafarge Tarmac, and I like this phrase, it's what Britain's built on, and I'm afraid it more or less is. Lafarge Tarmac, huge international company. This is me and one of the workforce standing at the top of one of I've forgotten the word again, big spiral thing that lifts loads of material in a spiral. Corkscrew. Huge complex production. Most of the tarmac concrete being made here is being taken about a number of miles away and dumped in a great big hole, as London has this huge infrastructure development called Crossrail. So the concrete is being taken up in the air and dropped down a big hole. So I spent time here, and it's an extraordinary environment. And to make concrete, you basically get a load of raw materials and you lift them through enormous effort up in the air and then drop them. And then you do it again, and then you mix them. And that is as simple as the process, very, very basic raw materials. But this involves this enormous amount of human labour. It's a battle with gravity. And in these huge cathedral-like spaces, and they're controlled from a small watchtower point. And one of the critical points about concrete is it's all about flow. If you make your concrete too thick, it's very strong, but it doesn't flow. To be dropping it in moulds in the ground, it has to be really, really runny. But then you have a problem with strength. So you're kind of balancing these two problems of strength and flow all the time. I've seen moments in this place where the battle between man and natural process and gravity and mechanics is beyond understanding or comprehension. This huge machine stopped, and I watched these guys pull out with great effort part of the machine's own tooth. Like the machine is eating itself, it's shaking itself apart in the effort to lift this stuff. So I've been working with them to try and understand how to grasp the complexity. This is technical services. Technical services is in a tiny mobile in the countryside, and there's three men pottering around, casting bits of concrete in plant pots, and making things for their garden. I like this pottering that technical services sometimes involves, and I'm working with them. It's not finished, but it's a working process to develop the brightest possible concrete they can make me. And the only way for me to work with these people is kind of as a customer, because it's such a high-pressured, dangerous, fast-moving environment. They haven't got long to spend with me reflecting on art. I have to approach as a customer, so they're developing a product for me, and I'm hoping, I want to do exactly what it says on the label in this diagram. I want to make yellow concrete that goes through their system, because that's what it looks like they do. So we're in the middle of making yellow concrete that will be pushed back through their production system, and I would have liked to drop it down Crossrail. I would have liked to make a really invisible yellow line in Crossrail, but no one's going to let me do that because the health and safety implications of that concrete are far too problematic. That concrete has to be strong. So this is the area of Crossrail, and in that yellow bit, I'm looking for a gallery that will let me give them a new floor. So I can make those processes visible. These are just my diagrams. So I'm hoping my yellow concrete will just be laid on this floor. And all those issues of flow and strength will come into play when I do that. Another very, very different work. Heather at one point said, how are you in, how do you put together these places? Concrete factory, hospital. And in my head, they're not very different. Because they're sites where these huge, complicated social processes are happening. So I've been interested in hospital art for years. I'm partly interested in hospital art because it's really unfashionable. It's not seen as a cool place for artists to work in some ways, and that lack of coolness really interests me. I like hospital art because compounded in hospital art is this enormous social problem about our values around art. We want art to do good, we believe art shouldn't do bad, but that there's ideas of well-being wrapped up in art. But also we've got these other ideas about art, that it should be challenging and complex and stimulating, and how those two things fight together really interests me. So I had a commission to make a piece of work for this place. It's Manchester Royal Infirmary, it's 8 hospitals. So I wandered around this site, going, oh, where shall I make some art? Shall I make it in dialysis? Shall I make it in, acute care? And it just seemed like the most ridiculous, specious decision. Where would I like to make some work? And I walked and walked and walked through this hospital for hours and hours and hours, getting more and more stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and lost, and think, oh God, I just want to take it all away. And I often find that these quite emotional responses drive the work that I make. I thought, I'm going to take it all away. So this very simple response, I like simple processes in a way, began me on this inquiry. How do you take away all the art in a hospital? This one has 300 plus works. Where do you begin? So how do you access the chain of command? Estates are not in charge of hospital art. Maintenance isn't. Clinical care isn't. No one is in charge of hospital art. It's in a void where bureaucratic lines of command don't reach. Amazing. But gradually I worked my way through, in fact got partial, piecemeal permission. And so I worked with a team of 10 people and I turned the hospital route into a linear map. So we started at one point of our line and we flew through the hospital. Not flew, but we flowed through the hospital, clearing away the art, if only it was that easy, in a weekend. We found out all sorts of things about hospital art that we wouldn't know from doing this, and I really like finding things out. Found out that you have big art in big corridors, and medium-sized art in medium corridors, and tiny art, which sounds very obvious, but you wouldn't necessarily think of that. I found out that you have abstract art always in sexual health, which is where this is. Always. I found lots of Manets and Monets and Klimts, and I would normally be a bit snooty about that, Athena prints, dull copies of things we've seen. But I started to fall in love with these prints over again for various reasons. So all was going fine, and then I hit a wall, almost literally. We couldn't get this piece of work off, because hospital estates had built the trunking round the security clips. So the hospital had grown round the art. It was physically unable to get it off. So I panicked. My grand scheme is about to come apart. My project is going to fail. But at that moment, I realised it wasn't a failure, that if I listened enough to what the site was telling me, I would see that real life, something going to explode. So I realised that real life is bleeding through, and I like it when real life fights back, because I think you do these art acts and then real life doesn't let you do them, and it reveals itself to you. So I also came to take away this beautiful set of gold leaf paintings, and Matron appeared and said, you're not taking the gold leaf paintings because I bought them for my patients. I tried to take away the bunny at the opening of the children's ward, and the artist that I was working with, who had grown up in Manchester, wouldn't let me touch the bunny. So there were all these values about actually how important art is to us being revealed. All the works, Their absence was marked by these tags. All the works was moved to Castlefield Gallery, which is quite a chic, smart, budding, aspirational gallery in Manchester. And we filled the space like we were a liquid. We started at one corner of the gallery and literally filled the space. No salon hang, no aesthetic considerations, it's just the material, it's just a compression of space. But in doing this compression, I began to see histories of healthcare revealed in a way that I wouldn't normally see. So these are paintings of the hospital founders. These are the only insured artworks in the hospital. But they're next to these black and white pictures that are kind of film noir-y, sophisticated, and they're all smoking. There are also these very interesting kind of prints that draw on ethnic histories in Manchester, because these are from the 1980s. Oh, sorry. 30 seconds just to finish, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Very interesting histories around our care about how ethnic communities in the city were accessing healthcare. So by doing this, you see things that you can't see. The gallery was quite uncomfortable with some of the reactions. Some people came in and said, "Oh, at last you're showing some really nice art," which is not what they wanted. And also, I began to understand that the Manets and the Monets and the Klimts were not to be sneered at. They were actually better than some of the contemporary works. And it made me think about the quality of what we do in healthcare. So in a way, this work it's a kind of examination of what we think art does in healthcare, but it uses healthcare art to examine and ask questions about what we do in galleries, and to kind of open up those questions about what on earth we think art might be doing when it engages with social and public life. I'm done, thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Fabulous. We're now going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions and to talk to all of the people that spoke this evening. So we're going to very quickly assemble some chairs on the stage, and then we'll ask all of them to come up, and you can ask questions as we go. Projects from the artists that you've seen tonight, and also understand some of the complexity of the things that have been asked to deal with in their project as they develop their proposals over the next few weeks from David's presentation. So we just like to open up the floor to you to ask questions to anyone you wish who spoke this evening.
Actually, I want to ask you, so what were the initial parameters that led you to choose these artists?
So the question was, what was the initial parameters that led us to choose these artists? The way that the project works is there's a call that goes out. In the call, we ask for artists who are interested in the subject, but didn't apply with a defined outcome. They didn't know what they wanted to do before they came. The call asked for artists who were interested to respond to a context and had the appetite to look at this place in extreme detail, and to listen and work with subject matter experts. And I think it was a jury selection process. There's 7 jury members, and the jury was very keen on finding artists who were interested to work in that way and were open to that way of working.
I can ask a question. David, thank you for setting the stage on the importance of having to be able to communicate ideas and challenges. And when it's put next to a series of artists who are dealing with the environment and perception in certain and different and unique ways, I'm wondering if each of you might want to comment just on maybe a perception or something that's happened in this week that has sparked something of interest, and not to put any of you on the spot, but I think just really your work has been in very different ways, where it's water running down, following water, or sometimes it touches water, sometimes it doesn't. But there's always a perception or dealing with something social or physical in the environment. And it's very hard for us to see a lot of these things until they're pointed out. And that's what art has the possibility to do. So if there is a perception or something, just something that you noticed, it would be lovely to hear.
My favourite moment was we had a morning when we visited, afternoon when we visited Glenmore, which is incredibly clinical, high security, incredibly clean environment where our drinking water is prepared, your drinking water is prepared, and then and we had a tour that was incredible tour, but quite remote, and then we went straight from there to Bonnybrook, the water treatment centre, where there's these amazing women who are falling over themselves to communicate. And the drinking water place, as Stokely was saying, we're the threat. And when we went to Bonnybrook, that's the threat, and we were being protected. And there were these counterpoints between one end of your body and the other end of your body. And also these really gendered environments. It was very male at the first place, it was very female at the other. And that, just trying to hold those two spaces together in my head, it's nearly making my head come apart, but for me that was really exciting.
I think there was aspects of every single location we went to and every speaker that we heard that rang somehow some kind of inspiration. That I think last night or the night before I couldn't sleep at all. It was just like, bing, here's an idea, there's an idea. It's like, you guys are going to have me here for 20 years. There was a little cute little guy though in the water bear. He's so cute. I mean, and there was the other cute guy right here, but anyway, so that, there's lots of things. I mean, it's just really fertile, and I can't reiterate enough. Just the passion with which the water people through the whole spectrum, how they were so excited about what they do, and I can see why. It was infectious.
I think it's quite hard in a way to pin anything down, because we have seen so much, and it's all sort of trying to soak it all up and then trying to sort of process it. But I think also for me, in a way, it's partly the title of the whole thing. It's Watershed Plus and then Dynamic Environment. And it really is. There's all of these different layers from, the rivers and managing that. And realizing also that over here, you've not got a chopped up privatized system where, I think in London we've got sort of Thames Water, and then someone else deals with the sewage, and then there's environmental, and there's all these different private, in some cases I think, sort of components, whereas here, the city is really looking at the whole picture, from mountains to, downstream, from the drinking water, which obviously comes from those mountains, the waste and the stormwater, and all of these very complex systems that sort of fit together and that are being managed by the city as a whole, and that very dynamic set of interacting things.
I think what became very clear to me on this trip, when you first meet someone, anyone, like the most banal conversation you could possibly have is typically about the weather, right? But it became very clear that conversation is actually really interesting with everyone you will ever talk to for the rest of your life. And as we kept meeting these new people, the bus driver to Leonardo DiCaprio's opinions. We didn't meet Leo. To this wonderful woman at Blackfoot Crossing, to these scientists. Everyone is struggling with this fact that we need to develop new tools, new intensities of experience to engage with the environment in new ways. And it's become quite clear that every citizen is tackling this in their own way, and in specific ways in Calgary that are different in ways that people are tackling them in Pittsburgh, where I'm from. So that was something that I really came away with.
I needed a moment. I guess I kept thinking about something I guess I'll call the social Or one of the people we talked to talked about the sociology of water, which I loved as a phrase. And I guess the one example I think of is, so when the flood happens, the river changed, and some parts of the riverbanks went away. And so understandably, you have people who live there and who have enjoyed this space and are now upset that it's gone. And then you have a city who's trying to figure out, well, where do we fix and how do we set our priorities? And both sides are looking at the problem from very different vantage points. One's trying to keep the whole city alive, the other's trying to keep their spot alive, or wants their spot back. And those tensions just don't go away. There's sort of what we as individuals, like with my refrigerator and towel example, we want. And then there's what the city can do. And I'm really interested in those points where those two things hook up and where that came up in the conversation this week.
Any other questions?
I'm just kind of curious, now that everyone's here and wonderful presentations, I guess other than maybe Peter, who's frequented the city a lot, is this kind of a first experience for a lot of you in Calgary, and how important is it to have like fresh perspective on a city to kind of, I guess, inform your individual practices? And was that part of any of the decision-making process, I guess, for you, Tristan and Charles, to get those fresh eyes, because you guys have done so much, I think, for Calgary through having fresh eyes as well on our little experiment here?
I could probably start with that. Charles and I were not on the jury process, so we had no kind of influence over that. I would say, however, that we've been on all of the tours and journeys, and we've been working here now in total 7 or 8 years, but actually living here for 4 years. And there were things that I learned on these journeys and trips. So it's a constant experience of learning and gathering and understanding, the more in depth you go into a particular subject. Excuse me. And so I think it doesn't really matter where you're from. You're going into a subject that you're not an expert in, and you rely on the expertise of all those other people, the generosity of other people. It does bring, like Stokely talking about Seattle, for instance, and the comparisons are quite interesting. But I think as any artist, when you start a project, it's important to start kind of with fresh eyes, even if it's a familiar space. I don't know.
And I'll add to that, because I spent probably 4 years in Seattle looking at water and wastewater and stormwater, and part of me thought, well, it's going to be very familiar here. And yeah, in some ways it is, but in other ways, in big ways, it's completely different. I mean, the whole river situation and how much it is on doing its own thing, and just the volatility and this whole, this dynamic I really understand now a week later in a way that I did not have any understanding of before I got here. I could imagine it, but without going into a lot of detail, it's just, there's so many ways in which this place is in flux.
Not only had I never been to Calgary before, I'd never been to Canada, and because I've had a few little kids, felt like a long time since I'd been very far at all, apart from into Europe. I was thinking about this, and there was a story about the Calgary drain covers and the fact that they all say sewage, but they're not. I've got a bit of a thing about drain covers, and I often notice when I go places that they say Dudley on them, which is where I'm from, in the West Midlands, in the industrial black country. So I'm always interested in the fact that things can be very, very similar and very, very different. I think for me, very basic things like we haven't had a lot of snow in the UK for a very long time. I've still got flowers in my garden and just lost the rose petals off the rose, which is very unusual. But I'm having to be really careful not to be clouded by things like, wow, lots of snow, isn't it pretty? Wow, look, there are snowflakes, which, very basic kind of romanticism of cold climates. So I'm sort of having to try and work through get some of my preconceptions out of the way, actually, just to kind of deal with what the normal for you is, and not to be coloured by my romanticism of another place. So I don't kind of, come at it like an ethnographer exploring a completely foreign peoples, because you're not, you know.
I was just going to say, I think what we've had this week is not something that many people will experience. You know, it was a very unique thing, a very unique opportunity to speak to all these different people. And, you know, whether, I mean, I'm from London and I haven't been to Calgary before, but, you know, it was also, I think, a very rare opportunity for anybody to have all of that together. And very often as an artist, you are coming to things that you don't know about, you're learning and meeting these people and finding out all about it. And so it is fresh eyes, probably for those more local as well.
I have a question back to the audience. There are a couple of people here who are city staff that worked with the artists over this week and very generously gave their time to share with them their expertise and take them to places and kind of have conversations. And it was a huge demand for them. And I just wondered if any of you would be interested to sort of share your experience or what you felt or what you saw as a result of that experience. And I'm not going to pick you out, so if you don't feel like it, don't stick your hand up. But if you do, please do. Or I could just...
Tristan, you're going to pull me up.
This is... Can I introduce you? Sure. This is Norma Rucker, leader of biology laboratories. Microbiology.
And for those of you who don't know, a parts per trillion, one drop of rain in the saddle dome. So yes, I have been fortunate. This is the second time in my short time at the city, about 5 years, that I've been able to work with Watershed Plus specifically on a project. My team hosted Bee Kingdom a few years ago, and we have some lovely art for that. And there is a water bear made out of glass, and it is our favorite pet in the lab as well. So it was very much a pleasure. We hosted the artists yesterday at Bonnybrook, my manager, Nancy Stalker, and I, and some folks from the lab. And when Nancy and I were talking about what we should maybe try to help our folks experience yesterday, we knew that they were coming to the wastewater plant directly from the water utility, and we're always, oh yeah, in the microbiology world, drinking water is really boring. We do 10,000 tests a year to find absolutely nothing. So wastewater is really, you know, where we think the fun is at. So we knew they'd be looking at lots of pumps and flowing water at the drinking water plant, and so we really wanted to show them something different at wastewater. So I think we dreamed up something different at wastewater. They got to see the lab, and they got to visit with some of our folks who are in our industrial monitoring group who are concerned about what our industries in Calgary put down the sewer and the problems that they cause us. But, you know, it's always a pleasure for us to work with the artists. We do our work day in and day out, and we're very focused on public health and environmental health and meeting our regulatory requirements. And we're all very analytical, and I chuckled yesterday when they went and seen one of our fancy pieces of equipment in the lab, and our inorganic chemist went through a really long detail about how an ICP-MS works, and, you know, telling them about how the plasma heats up to the same temperature as the sun, and all these fun things. We're really analytical, and the pleasure of working with artists is making our work look different in our own eyes. It's like, wow, that's what we do? That's kind of cool. Because we see it very, very different. Our day is very analytical, so it's always a great pleasure to work with the artists, because it gives us an opportunity to step back from what we do and actually see it through a different lens, so to speak. So it's a great pleasure for us, and we're happy to always participate.
Just like to say, I didn't prime Norma for that. The question at the front, John?
I was interested in asking a question of David. There's an interesting, and the artists as well, this is a really interesting kind of gap or, between your approach, your talk on climatology and wood with an empirical and political basis, and all of the really interesting kind of, divergences, adjacencies, etc., that these 5 artists bring. And I'm interested in your reflections on what you do and what they do, what you're expecting or what you think might happen.
Well, I had no expectations. This is a bit of, like I said, a different gig for me, so I didn't have real expectations, but I found it fascinating, stimulating, and you're right that to some extent intellectually what we do is very different, science versus the arts. On the other hand, it's not, in that we're all trying to communicate. We're trying to get our message across. And I've given now more than 350 public talks on climate change. And when I first began to give these talks about 20 years ago, I would just put the science up and I would say, these are the facts. And wouldn't get much response. And I thought, well, I mean, this is the truth. This is the way it is. And I discovered fairly quickly that the people don't respond to facts. They have to have an emotional connection to the information. They have to feel something before they'll assimilate, comprehend it. And especially if you want to motivate people, you don't motivate people with facts. So I got off on this tangent. I began doing a lot of reading in social psychology and anthropology, and because all of my training had been in engineering and science. And so I've tried to find ways to incorporate stories. I heard somebody say that storytelling is our operating system. Basically telling stories, but get inspiration from people like this. It's well documented that most of the scientific breakthroughs have occurred when scientists have been inspired by people from outside their discipline. Because as long as you work with other scientists, you don't really get much inspiration. So not only are we better able to communicate by working with artists, but actually it can make our science better.
Yeah, any other questions? You're all thirsty for a beer. Anybody else on the panel, anything else to say or ask? Or?
Thank you.
It's been our great pleasure to have them, so I'd just like to thank a few people. Thank the artists for their generosity. We have driven them hard. We're getting public art value for money is our intention. They've been willing to get up and give presentations at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is a big ask, and just been generous in every place that they've gone. Also, the city staff have just been incredible, as you've heard. Thank you to the City of Calgary and to the Public Art Programme for making it possible, and to all of you for coming tonight, and all of the people behind the scenes that make all of these things possible. Thank you very much. We will be going for a drink somewhere close by, so if you fancy coming, please do.